like the video, subscribe, and comment your country below so I know who's listening tonight. Turn off the lights and put on headphones for the full horror experience. Let's begin the nightmare. If you're brave enough. I never believed a graveyard could hold someone hostage long after death, but everything changed the night I agreed to take the caretaker job at Black Hollow Cemetery, a place tucked so deep into the forest that even birds refused to fly over it. And from the moment I stepped past its cracked iron gate, something felt wrong, like the air itself thickened around me, pressing against my skin, whispering warnings I was too stubborn to understand. The previous caretaker had vanished without explanation, though the villagers gave me vague, nervous shrugs and muttered things like, "He must have run off," or "Some places don't let you leave," and while I laughed them off then, I stopped laughing the moment I entered the caretaker shack and found his journal sitting open on the table, pages torn, ink smeared, the last line reading, "It wants someone else so I can go." I should have left that instant, but the forest was already dark behind me, and I convinced myself that village superstitions were just that, superstitions, until the first night came. The night I heard something walking outside the shack around 2:13 a.m., dragging its feet slowly, like it wasn't used to moving anymore but was learning again with every step. I stayed in bed pretending to sleep, breath held tight, while whatever it was shuffled past my window, its shadow stretching unnaturally long. Across the curtain, thin and crooked and twitching like it had too many joints, and I only realized it wasn't human when I heard it whisper my name, not in a voice you'd expect from a living person, but one that sounded like three tones speaking at once, a whisper behind a whisper behind a whisper, something layered and hollow, echoing like it crawled up from underground. The next morning, I forced myself to do the job I was hired for. Clean the gravestones, trim the grass, and check the mausoleum. But the deeper I walked into the graveyard, the more the trees seemed to lean inward, their branches bending like skeletal fingers pointing me toward a certain section, an old neglected pot with graves so weathered the names were almost gone, except for one, a tall, crooked headstone with a crack running through the middle like lightning had carved it open. And though the name should have been long eroded, it wasn't. It looked freshly carved, clean, untouched by time. Maren Holt. Died 1871. Bound to this earth. The word bound chilled me instantly, like someone had poured ice water through my spine, and when I crouched down to touch the stone, I swore I felt a heartbeat coming from the ground beneath it, a slow, heavy thump like something buried deep was still alive, still waiting. I jerked my hand back and stumbled away, pretending I hadn't felt it, pretending the air hadn't suddenly smelled like damp soil mixed with rotting flowers. But the feeling never left me. Not that day, not that night. Especially not when the footsteps returned at 2:13 a.m. again. Only this time they stopped directly outside my door, and when I finally gathered the courage to peek through the crack in the curtain, I didn't see a person. I saw a tall, thin silhouette standing completely still among the gravestones, its head tilted far too much to one side, its limbs long and stiff, and though it didn't move, its shadow did, writhing behind it like a separate entity, twisting across the graves as if searching. I slammed the curtain shut and sat there frozen, listening as the whispering voice started again, this time right behind my door, saying my name with that layered static-like tone, each syllable dragging like nails across a chalkboard, and I understood something horrifying in that moment. This thing didn't wander aimlessly. It knew exactly where I was, exactly who I was, and exactly what it wanted. The next day I tried to leave, packing my bag and heading for the gate, but the iron bars wouldn't open. No matter how hard I pulled, pushed, kicked, or screamed, they stayed locked in place, though there was no lock on them at all, and that's when I noticed something etched into the metal, old scratches forming words, "Someone must stay." I don't know how long I stood there staring, heart pounding, stomach twisting, until I heard movement behind me. Something dragging across the grass, slow and wet, and when I spun around, the entire graveyard seemed still again, as if nothing had been there at all, but I knew I wasn't imagining things anymore. That night I stayed awake, gripping a rusted lantern like it could protect me, waiting for the footsteps, and when they finally came, right on time at 2:13 a.m., they sounded closer than ever, softer, slower, almost excited, and then the voice whispered something new, something that froze my heart completely. "Come see me." The floorboards creaked as something pressed against the shack door from the outside, not forcefully, but gently, like a friend knocking, like someone inviting me out for a walk. The doorknob twisted, rattled, then turned fully. But the door didn't open, as if something invisible held it shut on my side. Maybe the last trace of the old caretaker trying to protect me, or maybe the ghost simply couldn't enter unless I allowed it. I stayed silent, breath shallow, and the thing eventually stopped twisting the knob, but it didn't leave. Instead, I heard scraping across the wood, as if long nails dragged slowly down the door from top to bottom, then across the windows, circling the shack like a predator studying its prey. I couldn't stay inside another second, so before sunset the next evening I forced myself to investigate the grave of Maren Holt, armed with only a lantern and a shovel I grabbed from the storage shed, and when I reached the cracked headstone, the earth around it looked freshly disturbed, not like someone had dug it up recently, but like something beneath had pushed upward from below, straining against the soil. I put my ear to the ground. God knows why. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I wanted to believe I was going insane. And I heard it again. That slow, rhythmic heartbeat, deeper and louder now, almost hungry. The journal from the previous caretaker mentioned Maren Holt only once on a ripped-out page I found under a floorboard later that night, and the entry said, "He wasn't buried, he was imprisoned. This place is his cage. The ghost isn't haunting the graveyard. The graveyard is containing him. If it cracks, if it opens, he walks." After reading that, I realized the footsteps weren't just wandering. They were pacing, circling, testing the boundaries, waiting for something that would weaken his confinement. And that something was me. For the next few days, the atmosphere grew heavier, the shadows longer, and the nights colder, and every evening, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the presence came, dragging itself closer, whispering more urgently, more impatiently, until the voice finally spoke a sentence that made every hair on my body stand on end. "Let me in, and I will let you go." I didn't answer, but the silence after that was worse, because it waited, and then I heard a sound no living creature should ever make, a low rattling breath mixed with a distant groan, like earth cracking open underground, and the journal's warning echoed inside my mind. If a living soul acknowledges him, he will be free. The next sunset brought a blood-red sky, and the air tasted metallic, and the animals in the surrounding woods vanished completely. Even the wind refused to blow across the graves. And as night fell, I felt something shift beneath the ground under my feet, like the soil inhaled. I barricaded the shack door with furniture, tools, anything I could find, and just before 2:13 a.m., I heard the old iron gate behind the graveyard creak open on its own, despite never opening for me. And then I understood the truth, a truth that hollowed me out from inside. It wasn't a gate to keep things out. It was a gate to keep him in. And it had just opened for him. The footsteps approached slowly, calmly, deliberately, and when they stopped outside my door, the voice didn't whisper this time. It spoke clearly, deeply, almost human now. "I am no longer bound. But you are." And when the doorknob turned again, gently, confidently, I felt the cold realization that the story the villagers whispered wasn't superstition. Someone always had to take the place of the one who left. And this time, it was me. I couldn't sleep after that first night in the graveyard, because every time I shut my eyes, I saw that pale figure standing among the leaning crosses, the one who whispered my name even though I had never heard her voice before, and when morning finally came it felt like the sunlight itself was afraid to touch my skin, as if the cold of the graveyard had followed me home, clinging to my clothes and my breath. But I still returned the next evening because I knew deep down that something had changed inside me the moment I saw her, something that told me the graveyard wasn't finished with me yet, and as I walked down the dirt path between the thorn trees, I noticed how unnaturally quiet the village had become, as if everyone else already knew what I was just beginning to understand, that the dead in that graveyard were not dead at all, that they were listening from beneath the soil, waiting for someone foolish enough to step inside their forgotten world. and as I pushed the rusted gate open, I felt a pressure in my chest, like invisible hands were gripping my ribs and squeezing them inward, almost warning me not to continue. But I stepped in anyway because curiosity is a disease and I was already infected. And the moment my foot touched the ground inside, the air thickened as if the shadows were drawing breath, stretching, watching, waiting, and that's when I saw something new, something that hadn't been there before. A freshly dug grave near the oldest tombstone. The dirt still loose and dark like it had been turned by hands not meant for digging, and a single wooden marker stuck in the ground with no name carved into it. Just long deep scratches as if someone had tried to write letters but didn't know how, and as I approached it, my ears filled with the sound of a heartbeat that wasn't mine, heavy, slow, echoing through the soil beneath me, thumping directly into the bones of my feet, and I realized with horror that the beat was getting stronger the closer I came, like whatever was in that grave was waking up, aware of my presence, aware of me, and when I knelt down, I swear the earth moved, shifting, breathing, as if something underneath was pressing upward toward the surface, and I whispered, Are you the one I saw last night?" And immediately the wind stopped, every leaf froze mid-rustle, the entire graveyard holding its breath, and then a soft voice, the same voice as before, drifted out of the open soil, not loud, not whispered, but impossibly calm. "You came back," and the dirt trembled as though touched by gentle fingers, and I stumbled backward, tripping over a broken stone, scraping my palms as I hit the ground. But I didn't dare look away, I couldn't, because the earth was rising, pushing up in slow, uneven motions, like a chest struggling for air beneath a suffocating blanket, and as the mound lifted, I saw strands of dark hair pushing through the soil, then the outline of a forehead, then the hint of a face, but not the face of a living person. The features were too smooth, too pale, too untouched by time, like a porcelain mask someone had buried, and she pushed upward without using her hands, as if the soil itself was lifting her, presenting her, offering her to me, and when her eyes snapped open, two hollow, moon-white orbs with no pupils, the air around me collapsed inward as though the sky itself had inhaled sharply in fear, and every instinct in my body screamed to run, but my legs refused to move, locked in place by a force I still cannot explain, and she rose slowly from the soil until her chin, then her throat, then her shoulders were free, her hair hanging in wet clumps as though dripping with grave water, and she spoke again, her voice echoing in my head rather than my ears. "You saw me. Now you must remember me," and I shook my head violently, whispering, "What do you want?" Even though I already sensed the answer long before she said it, "I want you to take my place," and my breath caught in my throat so hard I thought it might shatter, because behind her, behind the shifting dirt, dozens of other graves began to pulse like beating hearts, each mound rising and falling, as if the entire cemetery was alive beneath me, and I felt the cold fingers of panic creeping up my spine as the shadows between the tombstones thickened into shapes, tall thin figures that moved without steps, drifting closer with every blink, and the trees bent inward like they were trying to block my escape, trapping me inside with her and the others waking below, and in that suffocating darkness I realized the truth. She wasn't calling me by accident, she wasn't haunting me because she needed help, she was choosing me, selecting me, claiming me, and the freshly dug grave wasn't new at all. It had been waiting long before I ever arrived, prepared for someone who would listen, someone who would look her in the eyes, someone foolish enough to return for a second night, and when she reached out her hand, thin and pale and coated in soil, my body leaned forward without my permission, pulled toward her like a puppet dragged by invisible strings, and as her fingers brushed my wrist, a jolt of freezing cold shot through me, flooding every nerve until my vision went black at the edges and I felt myself falling, not physically, but somewhere deeper, somewhere beneath the cemetery, beneath the earth, somewhere ancient and hungry, a place where voices whisper inside the bones of the dead and wait to borrow the breath of the living. And the last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me was her voice right beside my ear, though her lips never moved. "You're almost ready." I stumbled backward as the cold breath behind me thinned into silence, and for a moment I thought whatever had been standing just inches from my neck had vanished, But the graveyard didn't feel empty. If anything, it felt heavier, like the air had thickened, like the night itself had tightened its grip around me, squeezing until my heartbeat throbbed inside my ears, and as I moved deeper between the crooked graves, my lantern sputtering weakly, the mist curled around my ankles like fingers, trying to pull me into the soil, and I kept whispering to myself that I was alive, that I wasn't hallucinating, that I wasn't losing my mind, even though every instinct inside me screamed that something unseen was walking beside me, matching my steps, breathing in the same rhythm as I was, a presence so close I felt my skin rise in cold waves across my back. I passed the old mausoleum, its roof half collapsed, vines crawling over its stone face like veins, and I heard a faint scraping noise from inside, as if long fingernails were dragging across a coffin lid, slow and deliberate, and that sound made my legs weak, but I forced myself not to run because somehow I sensed running would draw it closer, provoke it, invite it to chase me with more hunger than it already had, so I kept walking carefully, whispering apologies to the silent graves, praying under my breath even though prayer suddenly felt like it meant nothing here, not in this cursed ground where the dead didn't sleep. The cold grew harsher as I neared the massive oak tree at the graveyard center, a tree older than the village itself, its bark blackened like charred bone, its branches twisted into shapes that looked disturbingly human, some like arms reaching down, others bent like watching heads, and under that tree lay the grave I had always avoided, the one everyone in the village avoided, a grave without a name. Only a stone marker split down the middle as if something beneath it had tried to break free. And the moment I stepped near it, the wind died. Completely died. Like the world had stopped breathing altogether, and in that suffocating stillness I felt the presence return behind me, stronger, leaning so close I could almost feel its chin hovering above my shoulder, and I didn't turn around, couldn't turn around, because every nerve in my body screamed that if I looked, if I dared see its true face, I wouldn't remain human anymore. Then the voice came again, softer this time, feminine, broken, trembling like someone trying to remember they once had lungs, whispering, "Why did you come back?" And my throat closed because I had never been here before, not in this life, but those words sank into my mind like I was being accused of a forgotten sin, something ancient, something older than my memories, and before I could move, the oak tree groaned, its bark splitting slowly with the moist sound of tearing meat, and a cold hand, gray, thin, with fingers too long, slipped out from between the cracks in the trunk, grasping the air like it was searching for me. I staggered backward, but the ground beneath my feet softened like wet clay, sinking, sucking at my boots, pulling me down as if the graveyard wanted to swallow me whole, and the mist thickened around my legs until it felt like I was wading through icy water, and then shapes began appearing in the fog. Faces, dozens of them, some half-decayed, some missing jaws, some pale and stretched like wet cloth, all whispering my name even. Though I had never told a single soul in this cursed place what my name was, I covered my ears, but the whispers seeped into my skull, echoing directly inside my mind. "You disturbed her! You disturbed her!" And when I tried to drag myself free from the sinking ground, something beneath the soil grabbed my ankle. A hand, cold, skeletal, impossibly strong, yanking me deeper as another hand rose beside it, then another, and another, until 5 hands were clawing upward, grasping my legs, pulling me toward that nameless grave as if it had been waiting for me, expecting me, wanting to replace whatever had escaped from it generations ago. My lantern finally went out with a soft hiss, plunging everything into darkness so complete I couldn't see my own hands, only the faint pale glow of the dead rising around me through the fog, their faces gathering closer, mouths moving silently now, eyes hollow yet watching me with a hunger that wasn't physical. It felt like they wanted my memories, my voice, my identity, like they wanted to erase me from existence and make me one of them. I screamed, not for help. Nobody in the village would hear me at this hour, and even if they did, none would dare come here. But I screamed simply because the pressure of their cold grip tightened around my ribs, crushing, suffocating, as if invisible arms had wrapped around my torso from behind, dragging me backward into that suffocating void behind my spine. Then the female voice returned, louder, sharper now. "You left me here?" And before I could deny it, before I could even breathe, I felt the cold outline of a face press close to the back of my head, lips near my ear, whispering a single word with such hatred, such grief, such unnatural sadness that it felt like my soul cracked inside me. "Traitor!" The word traitor struck through my skull like a rusted blade, and for a moment the world around me vanished into a shapeless blackness, the voices fading into a distant ringing, the cold hands gripping my body loosening just enough that I could gasp for breath. But when my vision returned, I wished it hadn't, because the graveyard had transformed. The fog had thickened into a near-solid wall of white. The trees around me twisted into impossible shapes, their branches bending downward like skeletal arms pointing at me, accusing me, condemning me, and the nameless grave at the base of the ancient oak began to tremble as though something enormous was moving beneath it, pushing up, cracking the earth from the inside, while the oak itself bled thick black sap that dripped down its bark like tar, each drop sizzling as it hit the ground, releasing a hiss that sounded like whispered curses. The cold grip around my ankle tightened violently, yanking me so hard my knees smashed against the sinking mud, and before I could pull away a voice, hers, pierced through every whisper, louder than the wind, louder than the dead, a voice filled with pain and rage and heartbreak all twisted together. "You came back, after leaving me here to rot." I choked out that I had never been here, that I didn't know who she was, but the graveyard didn't care about truth, because the moment I spoke the fog around me twisted violently, forming shapes, visions, memories that weren't mine. I saw myself as someone else, wearing clothes from another century, kneeling beside that same grave, tears pouring down my face as I whispered apologies to a woman whose pale hands were folded across her cold chest, her hair black and tangled, her eyes closed forever. Or so I thought, because in the vision they suddenly snapped open, empty and furious, staring directly into me, and I felt a connection, like a chain tightening around my soul, tying me to her in ways I couldn't understand. The vision shattered like glass, and I was back in the graveyard, screaming as the earth split open in front of me, creating a jagged, gaping hole from which a freezing wind roared upward, carrying the smell of old soil and something rotting deep beneath the earth. And then she rose, slowly, agonizingly slowly, her hands gripping the sides of the freshly torn grave, her fingers splitting from the pressure, black blood dripping like ink onto the ground as her face lifted into view, pale and sunken, her eyes hollow yet burning with vengeance, her hair floating behind her as though underwater, and as she stepped out, the dead surrounding me bowed their heads, lowering themselves in reverence, as if she were their queen, their anchor, their reason for crawling back from the soil. She walked toward me with a limp, each step making the earth tremble beneath my knees, and the closer she came, the thicker the cold wrapped around my chest, squeezing the breath from my lungs until I gasped soundlessly. I tried crawling backward, but the mud sucked me in like quicksand, holding me in place as she knelt in front of me, her face inches from mine, and when she spoke again her voice shattered into two tones, the voice of the woman she once was, and the monstrous echo of what the graveyard had twisted her into. "You promised you would bury me, and keep me safe, and you left me here, alone." My mind reeled, trying to deny it, trying to break free from whatever past life memory this was, but she reached toward my face with a trembling hand, cold enough to burn, her fingers brushing my cheek in a gesture that would have been gentle if not for the sheer hatred boiling underneath it. The moment her skin touched mine, a wave of memories, not visions, but memories, flooded into my skull. Memories of her screaming while villagers dragged her to this grave, branding her as cursed, blaming her for the deaths of their children. Memories of me standing helplessly at the edge of the woods, watching, too afraid to step forward, too afraid to save her. Memories of her reaching out while they buried her alive. Her last breath spent screaming my name as the soil filled her mouth and her voice died forever. And when the memories stopped I was trembling so violently I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare into her soulless eyes. She leaned closer until her forehead nearly touched mine, whispering, "You abandoned me then. But you won't abandon me now." Suddenly her arms shot forward, grabbing my neck with impossible strength, lifting me out of the mud as the dead around us rose higher, their whispers turning into frantic chanting, calling for me, calling for her, calling for the reunion of a promise broken centuries ago. Black vines erupted from the ground, wrapping around my arms and legs, pulling me toward the open grave as she dragged me closer, her grip tightening until stars burst in my vision, and I felt the cold edge of the graves. Stone brush against my back. I kicked wildly, gasping for air, and for a fraction of a second I saw her old face, before death, before vengeance, flash across hers, and in sheer panic and sorrow I whispered, "I'm sorry," even though I knew it meant nothing, and hearing those words made her freeze, her eyes widening, her grip trembling, the vines pausing mid-movement, the chanting of the dead breaking into sudden silence as she stared at me with something new. Pain, real pain, human pain, rippling through the monstrous shell she had become. For the first time, she looked almost alive, almost like the woman whose memories were buried in my mind, and her voice broke into a soft, fragile whisper. "Too late!" And with a violent scream she threw me backward into the grave, the world shattering into darkness as hundreds of hands tore at me, pulling me down into the cold soil, crushing me beneath their weight, burying me alive the same way she had been. And as the earth swallowed my face, the last thing I saw was her silhouette standing above the grave, watching silently, her hair drifting around her like smoke, the fog curling at her feet as the soil closed over me, sealing me in, stealing the last of the air from my lungs. The darkness pressed tighter, the weight unbearable, the world fading as my heartbeat slowed, and just before everything went silent, her voice, soft, distant, almost loving, echoed inside the darkness. "Now we rest together." Then everything went cold. Then everything went still. And the graveyard, at last, was satisfied.